Hi, I'm Moody, helping you to fish smarter, not harder. Today, we're going to give you the best chance of catching a good fish by showing you the method that I use to research an area before I fish it. Now, I'm not talking deep water where you would use a sounder. This blog is for land-based anglers and inshore anglers fishing the intertidal area. Now, we all know different species occupy different niches, and most fish like to hang around features or structure, or a food source. So, the key to giving yourself the best chance to catch a good fish is to identify these types of areas. Personally, I don't go fishing until I've taken some time to do some reconnaissance. When fishing land-based or inshore, the best time to do this is at low tide. Now, I know that seems pretty self-evident, but how many people actually take the time to go and do this and really think about what you're looking at? First up, we've come to this massive area of sand and mud flats right next to an estuary mouth. It's a very large area, and there's a number of scenarios that I can see here for all different sorts of fishing. You might notice here I'm standing right next to a big sand spit, and there's another one, a secondary one, up there. Now, on the run-out tides, what happens is, as the tides bellow out of the creeks and rivers here, they funnel over the top of this, because there's quite often, there's still 1.5 meters of water over this at high tide, sometimes more. But as the water bellows out, it comes over the top of these and creates these divots in behind here. And what happens is, as the bait fish come around, they feel a comfort zone, but also the predators know to find the bait fish there because of that. And they usually lie in wait. And this is great for flathead, anywhere along these drop-offs, off the end of these spits. Now, in between the two spits and the main river, we have a couple of areas of sandy mud and then thick hard mud. Now, in the sandy mud, we have things like yabbies, and you can see their holes dotted all through it everywhere. So species like brim and whiting, grunter, all those kind of things that love to feed on yabbies and prawns. This will be a great foraging area. So if you know exactly where each community of yabbies are, you can come in here at a high tide, whether you're land-based or in a boat, and fish on those areas. No point in fishing up on the loose sand up here where there's no yabbies, there's no food at all. Another thing low tide has showed me here off the end of this sand spit is a little bit of a channel running out. It ends up going into a gutter around here further, and it runs into the main river. That is the entrance area for a lot of species of fish that will come in here as the tide starts to run back in again. Now, whether you're land-based or in a boat and you can access an area like this, you would fish the early part of the run-in tide as it starts to flood up the gutter, because that's where a lot of the fish are going to come from until the rest of the flats get covered in water. So that's a good point to start at. And later on in the tide, when all this starts to flood, just come in here and fish on the designated yabby areas that you saw previously. Any entrances between the outer bars generally become draining points for the flats in general. And earlier in the tide, water would have been rushing out of here, off the flats up further, then coming out and spewing out into an area where this entrance meets the bay. And out here, on the edge of it, there'll be things like flathead, brim, all kinds of things waiting for all those bits and pieces washing out. There's also a few yabby beds just out here too, so that sand texture must be just right for them again. If you're an inshore boatie, something to keep an eye out for at really low tides are logs that are way out on the flats. You can see a couple way out there, so that later on, when you're coming back in your boat at a higher part of the tide, you've got a fair idea of where they are, so you can narrow down your hunt and go and chase them with your depth sounder. Logs like that out on the flats can be great little holding areas for fish. All different sorts of species will hang around them on a high part of the tide. Now, another area I like to go and have a look at, especially when I go away somewhere and I'm not familiar with the area, I like to go and have a look at these mangrove-lined foreshores around river mouths and flats, extended flats and all that kind of thing, because we do a lot of lure fishing. Now, quite often the water's right up in here, lapping against the beach area, and we like to lure fish the waters down for a variety of tropical species. But when the water drops out a little bit and we start luring bits along the edges like these detached trees, it's good to know exactly where a lot of the logs and timber are around it under the water. So that can help you make decisions on where you're casting and what sort of snags you can expect. So I know off this big tree here, the fourth one back, there's a whole bunch of timber there which will be worth luring as well. So instead of throwing your lures in tight everywhere, you can also try out a little bit further if they're under the water a bit. Here's another situation where Okay, fair enough, the trees might be just sticking out of the water at high tide, so you don't need low tide to go and find them. But I tell you what, it's handy to have a look around the bottom to see what's there in the way of snags and things that are going to upset your baits or lures. So you'll know that when you first come here, maybe a dropper rig, if there's a little bit of current, might hold your bait up out of those roots. And also if you're luring, maybe a weedless plastic might be the best way to go to avoid getting snagged up. So low tide still helps out these kind of situations before you get here. Now, if there's one more thing I really like about checking out areas at low tide, it's also the $20 bills you come across. A new set of hooks on that one and we'll be catching fish. Now in this example, we're on a rock wall. Now when they make these things, sometimes what happens is when they tip the rocks out, larger ones or sometimes a cluster may fall right out further than all the others. And it creates a little protrusion that sticks out from the rest of the rocks. They make great holding locations for certain species of fish. But you wouldn't know that unless you came down here on a really low tide and had a look. And that's what I've done previously. I know where my couple of little points are along here where those rocks stick out, so I can successfully come here on many occasions and get a bite from a fish within a few casts. And the added advantage is, so I don't throw right on top of those detached rocks, so I don't lose a lot of lures. Now, if I was to live bait here, I want to be catching my bait somewhere nearby. I don't want to be dragging it kilometres with me, and it's just so much of a hindrance. But normally if you look at a rock wall like this, you'd say there's no way I'm going to throw a cast net here because it's going to get stuck on the rocks. But I have been here previously, like I said, and I do know a few areas along here where the shallow mud plateau comes up to the rocks, and it's ideal for throwing a cast net off, particularly at a certain stage of the tide when it starts to drain. So you can stand on the rocks, throw your net successfully onto a big mud plateau instead of dropping it on the rocks. But I wouldn't have known that if I didn't come down earlier and have a look. Talking about throwing cast net over the rocks, look at my lure just pulled up. Someone's already attempted it here. Luckily I'm able to get it in, and we'll take it away with us and dump it properly instead of remaining in the environment killing all sorts of baby fish. Here's another situation where anglers can go wrong. Over this side there's barely 6 inches of water left through this whole area now. Although we can tell going by the shallow exposed area here right now, but a little while ago, while that was still lapping the rocks, there was barely a foot of water there, and people will still come here and fish. Another observation here is if you're using a running rig, look at all those beautiful oyster covered rocks to get you constantly snagged up on. Yet the other side of the rock wall here is all mud. How do I know? Low tide. Something else I've taken note of at low tide for catching bait is this. Quite often on the higher parts of tides, the water will come in to these little mangrove forests and you get these little clearings. And when there's about a foot of water or so in there, they really load up with some good mullet and things. And what we do is we walk in, we ambush and throw the cast net. But we don't want any big logs floating in there spoiling our cast, because otherwise we've got to walk out, get it off, risk our lives with the crocodiles and lose all the bait fish. So at low tide, come down beforehand every now and then and keep your little pockets clear of snags. It'll help you every time you come back to catch liveys. So if you enjoyed this little tip and you'd like to see more, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, and if you only want some special tips I send out via email only, head on over to our website www.ryanmoodyfishing.com and sign up for free email updates. Get into the great outdoors, keep fishing smarter, and we'll see you next time.